We'll start. Our speaker today is Terry Kelly. Right here, he's alumni from here, and we're giving him the Alumni Award. So and today we will present him with that award. He'll give a seminar here today or Colloquium, and then he's going to give another talk, a public seminar, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock in Granger Hall, which many of you have seen that. But I think in this one you can talk more to the department about specific little things about the department, whatever you want. I'll mention his career. He comes to this university from back in the 1960s. He's actually a little older than I am. And he graduated in 1971, his bachelor's degree. And at that time, after the degree, I think he worked a little with Sue. And
Bob Walsh. I worked with both.
Yeah, and you got to know Macitas and all. And what he did is he brought Macitas to television weather, and he changed the world. And we're very proud of him for doing that. He'll probably tell us a little bit how that went over the years. He's now an AMS fellow, and so we're very proud of him. And I have this, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I have this plaque for you that you can keep recognizing your achievements. And this is the first thing, and then we will also be having a plaque that we'll put up in what Louis usually calls the Hall of Fame. And that's fame. That will go on the 8th floor. When you get out of the elevator, we'll be forever now seeing your picture staring us in the face. And so I'll let you tell us a little bit about your career.
Hey, thanks. Appreciate it. It's nice to meet you. So these guys called me up and said, out of the blue, they said, we'd like to give you a little award of distinction. And I said, was that extinction? Because that's about how I feel these days. I'm fortunate, I guess, 72, almost 73 years old, and still kicking. Got 3 sons in town, a wife of 47 years, 4 grandchildren in town. So it's great to have the family all here. It's great to be back in meteorology and space science. I've been here occasionally over the years, but it's been a few years now, so seeing the old place is terrific. And I actually saw the plaque on the front of the building said 1969. For a minute I thought, well, that's about me. No, that's the year the building built. Shows you how ancient I am, and that a couple more years I'll be, in 2021, 2 years from now, be 50 years since I graduated. So certainly had an interesting life, and had the pleasure today of talking with a few old friends, professors, and also meeting some of the graduate students and going to lunch with them, which I think was terrific, hearing about their aspirations and some of the new directions and goals they want to go in. So I had a very uneven start to my life. My wife says I'm still a little uneven from time to time, but she's helped me along, stepping over the rocks and the streams to get to the other side, which a good spouse will do. But I was one of these kids, as opposed to, it seems like all kids these days, my grandchildren, my children, they all seem to know what they want to do, and they're like rockets. I was telling somebody this morning about a young woman we know, who I think from about the age of 5 decided she wanted to be in concrete. And sure enough, now she has a PhD in concrete, and she is a big wheel in the West Coast designing concrete foundations and footings for medical clinics and roadways and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, I barely knew which end was up, you know, at that age. But congratulations to all of you that have your lives ahead of you, and will do lots of wonderful things. So I because I bounced around quite a bit, I was kind of an old graduate in 1971. I was 25 years old at that point, and partly because I'd originally gone to college at a different place. I went to Harvard as an undergrad, and I didn't have the faintest idea what I wanted to do, and it was dumb for me. I was not mature enough to go to a big public university like that, big private school, but I guess public universities can be that way too. I was attracted by the big names, you know, the Henry Kissingers who taught there, the B.F. Skinners, the Eric Fromms, all the big lights. So I, of course, signed up for all their classes, only to realize you get a lecture of 700 or 900 people, and then you have TAs that you meet with a couple times a week. I didn't find that terribly satisfying in terms of dialogue. So I was English first major, and then I was pre-law because my parents kept saying, you know, you got to do something that's going to make a little money at some point. But I couldn't see myself as a lawyer, so again, following the bright stars out there, B.F. Skinner, who was famous psychologist of the day, and so I transferred into experimental psych. I was telling somebody at lunch if I'd gone into behavioral psychology, I might have stuck it out, because I find that field very interesting. And psychology in general has helped me a lot in my business career over the years. But running rats through mazes and doing experiments and stuff on the experimental side, again, not a good idea. So after 3 years in, I was no closer to the solution than when I started. And so one day I was looking in the Boston Globe, little tiny ad in there. Come work for us, we'll teach you to fly. And this is Piper Aircraft down in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania. So I asked for a leave of absence. I went down and became a riveter on the assembly line in an old factory from the 1890s, building Comanche and twin Comanche airplanes. Fortunately, the guys who really knew what they were doing took me under their wing, or I probably would have ended up embedded in some wing fuel tank or something. But it was a union job, and I got a lot of respect for labor and the unions and people that did that kind of work. The reason I'd gone there really, in addition to work, was to learn to fly. So I thought it was pretty neat. So I got my private pilot's license, my instrument rating, my multi-engine rating there at Piper, and had quite a bit of flying experience. And being young and foolish, I flew into all kinds of weather situations that I shouldn't have, and probably shouldn't be here today as a result. Plus, I used to do really stupid things, like carry a gross of cherry bombs in the airplane, and the Pipers had a little side window about that big. And I get up to altitude and open the side window, and I light a cherry bomb in my lap, and I toss it out this little window, and then I bank steeply to watch it explode somewhere down there. Well, one can imagine all of the bad effects one could have. What if you missed the window? Even worse, what if you dropped it in the box? So, I'm here. That's about all I can say for it. But teaching, learning to fly made me realize I'd have a lifelong interest in the weather. I love storms, I love clouds, I love lightning, I love everything about it. And I'd never considered it could be a career. Had to hit me over the head backwards. And then I realized I'd had, growing up, backyard weather stations. I would tune the channel to see all three weathercasts and compare them against each other. I would take my mom's saran wrap and paste it on the screen and draw the fronts, things like that. So I was like, well, why not? I don't know what else to do. And Wisconsin and Penn State, Florida State were about the only places to go for an undergrad meteorology degree at that time. That's how I ended up here. We've been here for 50 years, more than 50 years. So, as I was saying to some of the grad students at lunch, just because you're focused, particularly the more you focus in on advanced degrees, the more tight your dissertations get and your field of research gets. Don't forget to always be open for those new and unusual opportunities coming your way. You never know what kind kinds of combinations you can make in life that may be interesting and useful to you. And a lot of mine were by luck, but there were other times when I was able to reach out and take opportunities. And one of them was space science approached me after I graduated and said, why don't you come downstairs? We're just about to show the first satellite image electronically, and sure enough, we could do a 2-image loop and look like a washing machine. And I was telling somebody today, it was on the old deck PDP-11, which took, I don't know how many rooms in this building, and the 10 megabyte, not gigabyte, disk drive took an enormous amount of space, several refrigerators full. And today my presentation was on a 64 gigabyte thumb drive. And I'm sure you all know your iPhones or whatever have more computing power than the space shuttle ever had. So what I've been able to see in my lifetime, and what you will see in yours, pace of progress is enormous. And if I have any real worry, it's that events may overwhelm us. There's so many things coming so fast, ranging from artificial intelligence to climate change to all sorts of new weapons technology, biotech, biowarfare. I mean, I just hope we can make it through, and I think we all need to play a part in that going forward. So I worked at space science for 3 years, and during that time I also had an office on the 14th floor here. And I got involved further in the synoptic part of particularly broadcast television, and started off doing the first television with my mentor Frank Seacrest, who was a synoptics professor here for many years. He was a great guy. And he and I ended up doing the first television weathercast on WHA, the educational station in town. At that time, Tom Skilling, who you probably recognize the name in Chicago, I knew Tom casually, and he called me up one day and he said, Terry, he says, I haven't had a day off in the 3 years I worked here. There's nobody else to help me. In those days, the news was only 5 days a week plus 6 o'clock Saturday. So he did have most of the weekend, but no vacation. I want to go to Alaska. I want to visit my brother. Turned out to be the guy from Enron who went to jail, Jeff Skilling, in the small rural department. And so he said, why don't you come out and make a videotape? If it's good enough, maybe I can get away for a week or two. So I went out and made a tape. Not a week later, he got a call from Jacksonville, Florida. Our chief meteorologist has suddenly passed away. We want you to replace him. The only problem is you got to be here Monday. So we have nobody. How much? Well, it's like 5 times more than he was making. Okay, I'm coming. So there was nobody to do the weather on ABC Channel 27 here in town. So out of the blue, I get a phone call from the general manager who said, Kelly, he explained about Skilling. He said, the only tape I got on my desk is this tape you made for Tom. And he said, frankly, it's awful. It's just terrible. But he said, we don't really have a lot of choice here. If you can be here Monday, we'll give you a try. And so that's my exciting way of, becoming a TV meteorologist. I was the first degreed meteorologist on the air in the state, and one of the first in the Midwest. I went on to broadcast weather on all 6 of our ABC affiliates and did some national work through farm shows and things like that. But that's again another lesson of be watching these opportunities that are zooming by. You never know when you should reach out and grab one. So I continued to work at space science, and so I had no idea if I really had a career in television, having been told how awful I was. And finally, I founded Weather Central in the fall of that same year, along with Dick Daly, who was also at Space Science. And we got involved enough, saw enough future in it, I finally resigned from space science. And by the way, I should tell you briefly what I was doing with space science. They put me in charge of a program called IVAM, which is Innovative Video Applications to Meteorology. And in those days, you got to think back all those years, we were lucky to get a forecast that meant anything, let alone any kinds of precision. If you're got to make snow for your ski hill, or you've got to spray your fields with a crop duster, you need certain wind conditions and directions, or you're a power utility, you need hour-by-hour temperatures and wind speeds and cloud cover and all that. There was none of that. So that's the area we focused on for the first 5 years, was that kind of particular orientation. And we were supported by a grant from University Industry Research. It wasn't a lot of money. Started at the department here, and after the first year, we had some complaints from some of the private weather services who said, the university's paying a private, to compete with the private sector? What's wrong with you guys? The dean got involved and everything else, and they came to me and they said, we'll give you your second year's money, but you got to move out of the university. So that was another kick in the direction of being Channel 27. So the first part of and I'm going to go quickly through these because you know a lot of this stuff. And I'm kind of going to reverse the timing a little bit. Tomorrow night, when I present to more general public people, I've got about 10 or 15 minutes on the development of television weathercasting as a useful tool, which I'm going to show you first. And then the remaining 30 minutes or so is on some of the bright lights that are out there while we sit and moan about our pal Trump and everybody else getting in our walker and everybody else who's gotten in our way in terms of making an impact in Wisconsin and nationally to really address climate change as such an urgent matter. There are an awful lot of positive developments out there. And preparing for this talk, I started to get on the tickler list for a lot of these magazines and articles, and they're flooding it. I mean, it's encouraging because there is lots of stuff happening. Does it need to be coordinated? Does it need to be organized? Does it need to be put together in a form that is more rational for use across the whole country? Absolutely. But one thing I'm going to show you is where Wisconsin stands right now after 8 years of Walker, and forgive me if there's any Republicans in the room, compared to our surrounding states, Minnesota, Michigan, Illinois, Iowa. And there are differences in each of those, but the answer, of course, is we're way behind. And but the answers for the other 4 states or 5 states are not uniform. They've all found a different way, and that's encouraging to me because I think it doesn't have to be my way or the highway or one direction. There are lots of opportunities. So let me start with just a brief. If I'm hollowing, it's because I broke ruptured my Achilles tendon last summer, and it's still a little bit funky, so I may lean on this a little bit. So those are the 2 things I told you I was going to talk about. And the first part will be, we'll start off with some TV weathercasters. I had to find some that are older than me. And so you'll see a few of those who use chalkboards and things like that. And then up to where we got to with electronic weather presentation. And as I was explaining to somebody today, when I started, all we could do is concentrate 90% of our weathercast on what had happened and the current conditions, and only 10% on the forecast, and most of that was oral. Because we didn't have the tools. We didn't have the real-time data. We didn't have the animations and visualizations. Now today it all comes in automatically in high resolution and micromodeling and everything else. And now we spend 10 or 15% of our time on what did happen, and 80 or 90% on what's going to happen. And I can tell you that the audiences out there are very pleased with that. That's one of the big changes that's happened. And then we're going to talk, I've talked a little bit about climate change. Wisconsin versus the other states. We don't want to get into massive geoengineering, but if we really slip on our timetable, that could be the only thing we can do to save the Earth. It's massive, it's scary, it's costly, could be done. But you can have a lot of arguments between countries and other kinds of things about, you're stealing my sunlight, or you're polluting my ocean with iron, or you're doing other kinds of things. And as I mentioned, I'm trying to be very positive about what we're doing. We don't need to go through this stuff. We talked about it all my, I ran Weather Central for more than 45 years. We ended up selling the business. It's now owned by IBM's artificial intelligence unit called Watson. And a lot of it is the micromodeling concepts that were developed. They're less interested in the broadcast part, although conveying the information once they model it down to a tiny degree is also important. They also now own the Weather Channel, they own Weather Underground, they own Weather Services International. So they've accumulated quite a few weather businesses as they go on with their work. These are, to tell you a little, another little vignette about my background. These are magazines, pulp magazines from the late 20s. So my father used to write science fiction for these magazines, as well as several science fiction books, because he figured out they were very poor. My dad worked in a box factory for 50 cents an hour and 6 days a week. But he could get almost a penny a word for accepted stories. So he did things like, talk about rockets, nuclear propulsion, atomic war. This is back in the 20s and early 30s. This story, The Light Bender, had to do with black holes and phasers and other kinds of things. So you see what these are labeled, Adventures of Future Science. Great way to imagine what the future might be, as we all should. Skip that. I think we're talking about this. And the goals we had at Space Science and at IBM were to take the initial imagery and make it available to markets worldwide, develop a production system for television weather, and find some way to nationally distribute this, what we were calling nowcasting. Nowcasting, as conceived by Frank Seacrest and the team here, was much more detailed, accurate weather over very short intervals, up to 12 hours, which was, it was a big hole. We were doing better at 24 and 48 hours at that point than we were doing in the next few hours. And it has to do with a lot of the instrumentation we now take for granted. Doppler radar, high-resolution satellite imagery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of the focus is on that and on real-time.
In the early days of television, weather presentation was only electronic in the sense that the television camera was an electronic device. The map images and other visuals used to support the presentation were hard copy materials that were shot with the television camera. The earliest techniques predated the use of chroma key devices, so the support visuals were literally placed on the wall behind the presenter, and then the entire scene was shot with the camera. This scene is the image that was broadcast. These are example weathercasts from the mid to late 1950s. Note the hard wall maps and absence of electronically generated images. The examples show two different approaches. The first two clips where the information is assembled and prepared on the map in advance, and this third example where the map is actually a chalkboard where the presenter draws information on the map live on air. Here's a temperature plot circa 1955.
And at
How many of you have theme music for your weather segment?
Night.
Remember Harry Nolman?
Cabin TV's weatherman has been blocked.
The first step toward electronic image sources for television weather were radar displays. The first radars used in television were originally designed as airborne systems. As early as 1959, Roy Leap at WTVT-TV in Tampa, Florida, was using one of these units that had been converted for ground-based use. The use of overlays allowed for the progressive building up of information to discuss a particular weather situation. A variety of different display mechanisms were employed, from maps that were sequenced on a circular dial through a viewing window, to the use of a series of weather boards, which could be pulled down within a map frame. The amount of manual work that accompanied these kinds of presentations was simply phenomenal. At the end of a busy weather day, it was not uncommon to find a crew of dead-tired forecasters backstage in the television weather office. As the 60s advanced, the appearance of satellite imagery became more commonplace. Still a hard copy presentation, these images were based on analog satellite data and were monochrome images. In the 70s, interesting developments were occurring outside the broadcast weather presentation arena. A project called MCIDAS, which was an acronym for Man-Computer Interactive Data Access System, was underway at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. The goal of MCIDAS was to electronically display real-time satellite imagery and other current weather data for analysis. Dr. Richard Daly, a co-founder of Colographic Systems, was then a member of the MCIDAS team and was very involved in MCIDAS satellite imaging and graphics display programming. MCIDAS was unique in its use of a video display for weather data overlay analysis, and this, along with Dick's involvement, were to have a significant impact on electronic weather graphics a few short years later. Personal computers were just being introduced toward the end of the 1970s, and it was at this time that I began to explore the idea of applying this type of technology to my television weather presentation. I was fortunate to get in contact with Dick Daly, and we began to explore the possibilities that the new personal computer technology could bring to television weather presentation. The first computer we obtained was an Apple II, and in the spring of 1979, Dr. Daly began to write the first computer code for what was to become the first color graphics weather system. Our first demonstration videotape that you're seeing here was created in May of 1979. Later that year at the AMS Broadcast Meteorology Conference, I delivered a paper that focused on the future of computer graphics in television weather. I'm certain that my projections at the time underestimated the explosion of interest and development that was about to occur. These first graphic systems still did not provide satellite imagery because of the lack of commercially available satellite images. At the NAB convention in 1981, Color Graphics, in conjunction with a newly formed company called Environmental Satellite Data, showed for the first time what digital color satellite images would look like and announced that our new product, the Liveline, would be available in a few months' time. The Liveline 3 still retains the honor of being the most popular weather graphic system of all time, with over 250 units installed. The application-specific design not only made the creation and on-air sequencing of an entire show possible, it streamlined this process and allowed the broadcast meteorologist to present a highly sophisticated presentation with a minimum of preparation time. We did other weather-related product development, some of which in retrospect did not turn out to be all that successful for introduction during the Liveline 3 era. Lightning detection and display, which still holds much promise and significance for weather markets, was one of our more interesting adventures. We sold just a few because the price was so prohibitively expensive at that time. But weathercasters and station management took the promotability of this technology to heart. Just look at this promo from WXIA-TV in Atlanta, Georgia, taken from this time period, and you'll see what I mean.
Okay, let's dial up our lightning tracker now and take a look at an electric.
The man on the left is watching the weather on 11 Alive.
If you're outside,
The man on the right
open area near
isn't.
tall trees.
That's why the man on the right is about to get the shock of his life. At 11 Alive, our new map lightning tracker pinpoints lightning strikes and plots the advance of dangerous storms. May the best reason to watch our weather is you.
You get the sense that that promo probably didn't stay on the air very long. But it actually was aired in Atlanta for at least a week. I like the burning shoes. You can see how old I am. I don't know what vintage that bus is, but it's a long time ago, I'll tell you that. But that's 1974 when I joined Gary Bender and John Lindgren. John has passed away now. Gary's still alive in Arizona. But that's hard to look at. And we started off with some of Frank Sechrist's teachings in making paper maps like this. These are 8.5 by 11 maps. And we used colored Zipatone, pasted on the map, and used a razor knife to cut out the color bands, and then we used little press-on letters or arrows to make the maps. And if you had 8-10 maps, it took you hours. So we had a nice-looking weather presentation, but you know, there were times they gave me a windowless office in the beginning. There were times I'd say, "Oh, it's a nice evening outside," and somebody said, "It's pouring." So there wasn't a lot of time for the forecasting part back in those days. And then they would all play tricks on me. The director lit my maps on fire one night on the air. And I had to talk about the heat wave, of course. And then, you know, if something like a horsefly happened to land on your map, you know, it would suddenly be blown up to about 3 feet tall. So we had our issues there. But today, and we'll go through much of this, these are all done on systems at Weather Central. That's all reliable. Today you're used to, I'm so sorry about this. I don't know what the jitter is here. There's now fly-throughs, hybrid 32-bit color, 4,000 by 4,000 resolution. Because you all have seen television weather in its current incarnation. We were very fortunate in those days to become the leader in this area, and so today we have 500 plus systems and software out there, including in China, where there's over 1 billion people every night that watch their weather on Weather Central gear using our software. And every place in between, from Cape Town, South Africa to London to Paris and Canada, and 400 stations in the United States. So, including all 3 stations in Madison still use our stuff, all 4. So it was a lot of fun, and I think that we helped somewhat the evolution of some of that earlier technology into something that enabled us as meteorologists to concentrate more on the forecast and the audience to understand better what was really happening, especially with the advent of real-time data like radar and satellite. One other thing we did, we formed a company, a separate company called My Weather, LLC, and this is in the days when computer power is still limited as far as computing the atmosphere, as I'm sure you've all heard. The ingest of and processing of weather data for the models is as complicated as modeling a nuclear explosion. It's one of the most computationally dense things you could do. And certainly in the days we started, there wasn't the ability to do that, and so we were reduced to, looking at things like 20-kilometer grid spacing, sometimes more than that in some of the models, and we knew that wasn't enough to get the detail we needed. So what we did was we invented the idea of using, we massaged it, utilized it so that each roughly 50 by 50 miles, as I recall, or 50 by 60, we would use a high-speed server to compute at a much higher grid density of 1 kilometer. over that particular area. And then we had about 120 of these that covered the United States. A lot of the algorithms and a lot of the work done on it was, of course, to do the blending. Because it doesn't help to have a bunch of tiles flashing up and down and one not agreeing with the other. So the whole sophistication of blending these things together and making them look like a seamless presentation was probably a lot of the work that we did. Well, we did end up with operational 1 kilometer capability, even when the Weather Service was still at 8 or 10 kilometers. And I know you know this, but you look at the 1 kilometer spacing compared to temperatures in Southern California, and it makes all the difference in the world. Here we've got Salt Lake region wind speed, 20 kilometers on the left, 1 kilometer on the right. If you're going to be siting windmills, you've got to know which hills it's going to blow the most and the hardest and the fastest and the longest. And we did some work in India because they had these terrible monsoon floods, particularly along the coast here. And we tested one, which we were able to save lives and help get people the warning they needed. Again, using 1 kilometer data, centering our models over India. So a lot of what IBM is doing, I think, is advancing that kind of idea into generations that we would not think of today. Climate change actions. Any questions about the? I have questions at the end too, but anything particular about the TV part before we launch into that? A lot's changed. I mean, we take it for granted today. As a result, 65% of Americans, when asked who do they trust most to get their science news from, TV meteorologists, their TV meteorologists. And so there's been a group of us, I've been less involved in many, so I don't mean to even include myself in the discussion, but I've offered ideas, have been involved in trying to simplify and rationalize the graphics, what we're talking about, what the impacts are, make sure the science is pristine, and then making those materials available to TV meteorologists all over the country. And Climate Central in Washington, D.C. is also providing graphics and ideas like that. But there's a group of on-air meteorologists, plus a few of us old guys, that are also helping with that. And when we have a group, when we have the surveys showing 65% of the people would listen to their local TV meteorologist, the scores are a lot lower when you talk about scientists who talk about climate or Republicans or Democrats or whatever. So we have a big obligation, I think, in the field to get it right, keep it right, tell it right, and I think we can make a big impact on people's willingness and determination to do something about it from an individual point of view. Governor Evers asked me to be involved in a little team about climate change in Wisconsin, climate change impacts, and what might be done in the future to try to get off of our last 8 years of inactivity. And I go all the way back to Thomas Edison in 1931, who had the right idea. Hope we don't have to wait for oil and coal to run out before we use solar energy. So these ideas are not new. It's been industry and business and profits and politicians that have driven a lot of this discourse, unfortunately, for all of us. And of course, our own Gaylord Nelson, one of his wonderful quotes, when asked how much it will cost to protect the environment, one more question should be asked: how much will it cost our civilization if we do not? And we're already seeing huge die-offs and extinctions and other impacts, and we haven't even begun to really be up the curve yet. So part of the problem is everybody argues all the time about everything these days. And so here you got frogs saying, we're slowly being cooked in the pot. And other frogs say, no, we're slowly being boiled in the pot. And the deniers are saying, there's no consensus. So, and then this one is frequent, glowworms that apply well to today, right? The upper Midwest has been colder than any other part of the earth here in the last few weeks. I talked to Sitka, Alaska, yesterday it was 47 degrees. And then this one came out of something that Trump said. And then finally, sorry that my political persuasions are interjecting themselves into this talk. But on the good side, all the way back to 08, so this is a 10-year curve here. How sure are you that global warming has happened? It started only a third of people. Now we're over 50% for the first time. And the deniers have actually fallen somewhat. But percentage-wise, it's a pretty good decrease. It's not going up. So we're beyond the majority now. Now we got a chance, right? 80% of Americans surveyed say their state government should be addressing climate change. And 76% say their own local government, the Madisons, the Middletons, et cetera, should also be addressing. And 83% want the federal government involved. What's happening to change these things? And you can see here, the biggest thing is the recent extreme weather events, arguments. We're finally getting through to some people supporting the existence of climate change, personal observations, news stories, this is where your meteorologists and climatologists. So again, I see this as positive. It's slow, but it's positive. And huge majorities of people want Germany to support real change. Now, business is the ultimate arbiter in this, because we first got to get the oil companies, the coal companies, the gas companies, you know, the people that make billions and trillions of dollars on this. This comes from the recent economic summit in Switzerland. So this is brand new data from the World Economic Forum. And they were asked to rate the dangers facing the world. And I think I understand why weapons of mass destruction get a 4, but also a low risk. I hope that's right. And then you see a lot of other potential things. What are the 3 that get the highest risk impact and the highest risk likelihood? They're all related to what we're talking about today. Extreme weather, natural disaster, and the failure to address climate policy. These are the top business people in the world. So we're coming at it from the bottom, from the public education, coming at it from the top, and then we're getting more of these very powerful oligarchs and millionaires and everything else who understand that something's got to be done. They're really worried about us. Why are they worried? They're not so worried about the climate. They're worried about their business. I don't care what they're worried about, as long as they're worried. You know, lots of effects that people that don't get talked about that much. This is the deeper ocean warming and the shallower ocean warming. The shallower ocean gets more attention because it is dramatically up in the last 70 or 80 years. But the deep ocean warming is really a concern because we depend on that. There's all kinds of frozen methane, and there's all kinds of other issues if you warm the deep ocean that are really going to be bad effects on all of them. I don't need to show you that graph. You've probably seen a billion of those. But let's talk about progress. States, one by one, piece by piece, and sometimes together, are taking action finally. The U.S. Climate Alliance in 19 states, consists of 19 states. Since the election, Michigan, Illinois, and New Mexico have joined, and I'm delighted to see the news, Wisconsin just a couple weeks ago. Cover more than half the U.S. population. They're going to coordinate together. They're going to focus on wind, solar, and EV. And we have some states that are way out front of the others. New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, and California. Their goal for 2030, is only 11 years from now, is 50% or more non-fossil, renewable energy, clean renewable energy. California and Hawaii have another goal, which is 100% by 2045. So anytime anybody says, oh, you can't do it, it's too costly, it's impossible, citizens will never stand for it, the utility bills are what, there's a million reasons. There's an awful lot of important states that are already over that. A lot of cities too, like San Diego, which has a 100% plan in place for more than 10 years. You probably have heard of cap and trade, maybe you've heard of carbon tax. They're different from each other, but one of these things is probably going to be one of the critical pieces if we're going to have success in the Paris goals for the international climate change action to reach in 2025, which is not very far away. Cap and trade, you give carbon emitters, say you're a power plant, you get a certain number of credits every year to emit a certain amount of carbon. If you emit less than that, you can sell your permits to somebody else that emits more, make some money. If you are emitting over your limit, you have to buy them from somebody else, so it's costly. And this is working quite well. It's already used in 9 northeastern states and in Connecticut and Rhode Island. British Columbia is the most successful area of the world in carbon tax. And they have been at it for a long time and they're making huge reduction. I must have skipped one of these. Cap and trade I talked about. Carbon tax is different. You tax the carbon emitted by an industry. The tax bill increases every year, so it costs more and more and more and more unless you reduce your carbon. There's a huge financial incentive to do that. The revenues raised in some states or some plans go back to the individual taxpayers, so that the taxpayers get a benefit. They may pay a little more on their electric bill, but they get a rebate. In some states like Massachusetts, a minority is retained for investment in electric buses, electric vehicle charging stations, and wind production, and things like that. So there are a number of ways to slice this cake. It's on the ballot again in Washington. It failed the first time, failed last time, got 43% of the vote. Next time they think they're going to win. So what are emissions coming from? Again, many of you know this, about a third from electricity generation. The biggest thing we could do is eliminate coal completely, add more renewables, and nobody likes to hear this, but we should be building, in my opinion, a lot more nuclear plants. There is new technology for plants today which are truly fail-safe. If the water goes away, the cooling system goes away, the power goes off, anything else, it just collapses into itself, doesn't run itself. I mean, it just doesn't operate. The radiation goes away completely. And they now can make these the size of this building or less, a lot smaller case. You'll see in Michigan's case, or Illinois' case, how much nuclear power has benefited Illinois, not Wisconsin. About a third of vehicle emissions. Audi and BMW both have a goal of being 100% all electric vehicles in the next few years. That's not the final answer, as they say on the quiz show, but because producing the electricity to charge the car, you still got to run a power plant. So you have to address the cleanliness of the power plant. But in the long run, this electric vehicles are clearly the way to go. There's over 1 million electric cars that have been sold in the United States. That's stunning. There's like 5 million in China. That I know. But Europe millions too. Now 1 million compared to all the cars we sell still ain't very much, but it's a good start. The other third is things like CalFarts, chlorinated fluorocarbons. I thought, oh, we're done with that. The ozone hole is closing. Well, it turns out only half of the CFC emissions have been stopped. 50% remain, primarily from China and other developing countries. Those are terrible, and they're many times worse than CO2. So the Paris goal is 26% reduction by 2025. I told you I'd talk about things that are going well on the right, because I think everybody needs to be encouraged if we're going to take the next step. You look at the coal use in the United States, recently in the Wall Street Journal. Did it again. Peaked out around 750 million tons, and last year was 475 million tons. This year will be probably 400 million tons, and it's declining quite rapidly. That's a great thing. This year will probably be close, just barely more than half of what we were 10 years ago. Now I thought I'd tell you about the Badgers versus the Gophers versus the Illini versus the Wolverines. And why can't we have a little friendly competition with our neighbors? The U.S., first of all, generated electricity like this since 2001. And this is from the Georgetown Climate Center. Coal, you see the decrease, that's the gray, down to 30% from 51. Natural gas, because of all the fracking, which itself is not a good thing, gone from 17% to 32%. Natural gas, I may be wrong about this number, but is about 50% less on CO2 emissions than, or net emissions, than coal.
Right.
Am I right?
Yeah.
So it's better, it's not perfect. Nuclear stayed about the same, hydro stayed about the same, and look at the yellow and pink lines at the bottom. You see a little bit of hope in the blue, up to 6%, and it's wind. So the solar and things are nowhere except in a few states. All right, here's our surrounding states. Here's what they've each done. Minnesota's done a nice job at reducing their coal from 66% to 39%. They've maintained their nuclear. Look at their wind increase from practically nothing to 19% of their state energy budget now is wind generated, and 11% gas, a little tiny bit of solar. Iowa has done an amazing job with wind. From practically nothing to 37% of all the energy produced for Iowa is now wind. Furthermore, you've got the beginnings of some solar and the beginnings of some hydro in Iowa, but it's mostly a wind story, and they've emphasized that with tax credits, and they're now the biggest assembler of wind turbines. They're very proud of it. The state, they made it something to strive for. It's created 10,000 jobs. It's been wonderful. Michigan hasn't done terribly much aside from increasing their natural gas and decreasing coal, but there's a little bit of wind sneaking in there in Michigan. California as the ultimate example to reach for. They are still 41% natural gas, but that's declined 15 points. There's zero coal. This is the coal line. It's gone. They are now 16% solar, 20% 20% wind, 8% nuclear, and then there's biomass here, and there's some hydro. So California does have a realistic chance to get rid of the last of this fossil fuel over the next 10 years. Oregon did it a different way, hydro. Look at their wind. Tremendous increase, 24%. Sorry, 20. What did it say? 10. Natural gas is 20. So, looking at the overall map, things are better, but not great. Quite a few more states have nuclear. Quite a few more states have changed coal to natural gas. More states are doing hydro. So it's a mixed bag, but somewhat of an improvement. Those states in paralysis include Illinois, 53% nuclear, 32% coal, down a little bit on coal, and it's been replaced by the natural gas, and a tiny bit of wind, 7%. Now we come to Wisconsin. We have reduced our coal by 15 points, but that's been entirely due to the greater use of natural gas. We've been closing nuclear plants, so I understand why. They're old and they're not safe, and they're the old models and all that, but we're down to 15%. Our hydroelectric has been pretty constant, but it's a blue line. And wind, a very tiny amount, solar non-existent. Here are the published renewable energy goals by 2025. And you can see where Wisconsin has been till Evers got elected. He hasn't set a new goal yet, but it's embarrassing. I knew the CEO of Alliant Energy, I knew the CEO of Madison Gas and Electric very well, the CEO of We Energies is on the board I'm on. They all tell me, Terry, we could do a lot more. We were willing to double or triple that 10% there has to do. But the PSCs of the world and the ratepayers associations and the government input where we can't do that. They were literally prevented, have been prevented from doing what they know they can do by political action. So as a result, here we sit. What can we do? This is again Georgetown Climate Center. They assessed each state's capabilities in terms of what they could do. Utility public benefits is working with utilities and getting them to move up rapidly. And you see that a lot of our surrounding states, including Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, 10 to 14% on a scale of 20. We're at 8. Building energy codes. California's at, how can they be 8 out of 7? I'm not sure. But anyway, they're just about at the peak in terms of strict energy codes for new construction and refittable construction for maximizing energy use without using fuel. Easy for them to say, right? There's a lot of sunlight, but it's still a lot of work. Minnesota and the rest are at least 2/3 of the way there in terms of their enlightened building codes. Wisconsin's 3 out of 7 and hasn't changed in many years. So a complete redo and a statewide look at common business codes for energy use and so on would be one thing that I would hope Governor Evers and the administration would look at. Transportation policies. Again, pretty sad. Huh? This is everything from electric buses to fuel mileage to, there's about 20 things that go into this score. And we're, what are we, 1/2 out of 9? appliance efficiency. California gets a maximum score. They demand that all appliances sold in California have minimum energy standards, the energy use standards that are far higher than anywhere else in the United States. Do you think that means they don't sell any appliances in California? Of course they do. In other words, can the manufacturers do this? Of course they can. Are they being required to do it elsewhere? No. State government initiatives in general were 4 out of 7. We're kind of a mid to low pack. We're very far behind in terms of, we can't have electric cars, we don't have charging ports, and we're way behind on that sort of thing. I wanted to give you one example of wind and meteorology combined before I end up this part. We had a project in Portugal in which we worked for a number of large wind operators in 2010. And this was the observed wind for August 1st through August 10th, 2010, at their main wind farm site. Overlaid on this now is the forecast that they were using, which is using a 6-kilometer model. And you see they get the trends pretty well, but it doesn't fit the curve exactly perfectly. Now, using our 1-kilometer model, look how close we got. That's yellow. And so the evolution of micromodeling like this, and the evolution of much greater capacity of turbines and generation are fortuitously coming along at exactly the same time. Why is this important? What does accurate forecasting provide to the wind energy industry? They get severe penalties if they overproduce or underproduce. I mean, parts of Europe are 40% wind. Can you imagine if 40% drops off your grid all of a sudden? What the hell do you do? On the other hand, if they produce 40% too much or 20% too much, they could burn out all the transmission lines. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's like one of the worst problems for utilities to deal with is wind, because it's up and down. It's not like a power plant where it's a certain. And then finally, minimize loss of energy and schedule maintenance. You can schedule your maintenance for this period or this period pretty effectively. I'll give you one other quick example. Our family was an investor in a very small wind energy field in southwest Minnesota, the hilltop country there, a lot of wind. And working with 5 individual farmers, we constructed 5 turbines, each of which was, I think, a Siemens turbine, typical 400-foot blades, whatever they were, giant things. And we had a take-or-pay contract with Xcel Energy, which is the big power utility in Twin Cities. All that was great, but that was a number of years ago, and now they're reaching their rebuild date. They have to change the generators up at the top. I mean, it's really expensive. Wind turbine technology has advanced so much in that 10 years that those 5 turbines can be replaced with 1 turbine doing 6 megawatts. And we could do 1.2 megawatts each of 5. And the cost of the 6 megawatt mark is less than any of the earlier ones by far. So it's now to the point where the cost of electricity from wind and beginning to be from solar is less than fossil fuel generation. That's another confluence where business is saying, something in here for us too. I don't know. So I'm going to skip this part. I want to touch this very briefly on geoengineering before I stop. I think probably most of you know some of the in extremis kinds of ideas. One is you could pump aerosols, primarily sulfur dioxide, and things high up in the atmosphere. You'd have to rocket them up there or build a new airplane to reach 100,000 feet. They have to be put in the same place that volcanoes put these particles when they erupt in Krakatoa, the big ones. Probably get about 1 degree to 1.5 degrees Celsius cooler by doing that. The only problem is you'd have to do it all the time, hundreds of flights a day. It sounds scary, and the estimated price is something like $2 trillion a year. But when you look at the gross domestic product of the world, saving the earth, it's doable in extremes. Another idea is to use robotic ships. I was talking about this at lunch, to do things like either fertilize the ocean, particularly with iron, very fine powdered iron. There are large areas of the ocean that are deserts in terms of phytoplankton. The main reason it turns out there isn't enough iron. This gets into the question of, okay, you're spreading iron near, name a place, North Korea. We said, well, wait a minute, what else are you doing to our climate? What are you doing here? So you get into all these political questions, things like that. But there are other opportunities. I've got some stuff in my folder if anybody's interested in a new way to capture carbon from power plants. First, I've seen the ones in direct carbon capture. They look like a great try, but I don't see any great success in the near future. A couple new ones in California where they actually are taking the effluent off of the stacks of power utilities and using the heat and seawater to produce chalk, and from chalk making concrete. And chalk, of course, is very similar to the limestone that we see at the bottom of oceans. And it's a natural process to form calcium carbonate and so on, which gently drifts down through the ocean. It takes carbon out of service over a long period of time. This could be done in large quantities. It could be done with no interference to the power company, and it could be done at a profit. So I probably have said enough. There's the idea too, a really way out one with these sails that are these, what do you call these? Anybody know? They're almost like Bernoulli effects or aircraft wing effects, but these are robotic ships that run on those that force seawater up through an extremely fine microgrid into the atmosphere. You have to make it really fine or it get high enough, because a lot of clouds over the ocean are not as white as they could be, the lower level clouds. And if you increase the albedo of the clouds over the ocean, you can get beneficial cooling effects. If you increase the albedo of the clouds in the stratosphere, like jet airplanes do, you get negative effects. So you have to pick your spot. And then, of course, there's space mirrors. You could launch either trillions of tiny aluminum mirrors or a few really big mirrors, again, a few $1 trillion, and probably reduce the temperature of the Earth by a degree. So I think with that, even though I have a few more things, I wanted to end with this. This was from the New York Times a month ago, or less. How do we cut emissions? And their answer was, do what these countries are doing. Here we are in 2018, and the U.S. Paris Pledge for 2025 is there. And the stated goal for 2050 is down here. And the scale on this, can you anybody read that?
Gigatons of CO2 equivalent.
Gigatons of CO2. It looks impossible. Maybe it is. But you can get almost to the Paris goals with one action. If you adopt a unified carbon tax similar to British Columbia, it started tiny and now is at $37.50 a ton of carbon emissions. The modeling shows that we would, by itself, almost reach the Paris target if we started right away. If we add to that, we require utilities to move gradually to produce their electricity from zero carbon sources, i.e. wind, solar, nuclear, and so on, you would add more. Norway's electric vehicle incentives, plug-in cars are now half of all new sales there. If we had a similar push involving incentives and more charging stations, all that, you could get another increment. The reason that is bigger is you're still producing electricity, which until the utilities convert over to renewables, is only getting partly there. China has set efficiency targets for industries like cement, steel, petrochemicals. If we had those efficiency targets that China has, then we have another increment. California has set energy standards, we talked about this, efficiency standards in homes and commercial buildings. If we adopted those nationally, we'd get another, not very big, but something. And if we curbed methane emissions from oil and gas operations, we could get another. And those, we would make the tariffs, so we'd have to implement more stuff. Ending up, I'll tell you one quick vignette that actually happened to spot yesterday in the press. There is a new kind of nitrogen oxide additive for cows, and steers, cows, dairy animals, all the rest of it. And it reduces the amount of methane produced in the rumen, which is the cow's first stomach, by 50%. Because it kind of gets in the way of the last stage of the production of methane in that rumen. Doesn't affect the cow. As a matter of fact, since some of the cow's energy goes into producing the methane, which we hate because, what is it, 18 times worse than carbon dioxide. The cow has more energy, grows faster on the same feed, averages 3% larger at slaughter, healthier. And the additive is so cheap, it can be put into the foodstuff, and the 3% gain in weight actually results in a profit. Again, this is being done in Canada, but it's also under review for licensing by the Department of Agriculture in the United States. And I guess it's as good as any to stop and say, I've just given you a few highlights on the good news front. That there are lots and lots of things that we can do collectively as a human race, politically, as state and federal governments, and individually, too, through our own actions. Thanks for listening.
Okay, now it's late, let's take a couple questions.
Sorry I'm long. Anybody wants to leave, certainly go. Yes. Ed.
Hey, you had a graph up there of the, you had the winds for Portugal, and you had that micro, and what was the lead time on that forecast?
Well, it was hour by hour out to 120 hours. So it took us, I think, 3 hours to do those micro models. Because we were only doing small geographic areas at a time. Not with craze,
Yeah.
but with silicon graphics or other kinds of high-speed processing.
So then you could give a forecast of it to
Yes, they use that operation.
power guy.
Young.
Quick comment and then question. Comment is that you showed wind speed at that Portuguese facility. Was it wind speed cubed or not?
I have no idea.
Big difference because the energy output from turbines. It was like the cube of the wind speed,
Good
which
point.
really says, if it doesn't get very windy ever, then forget it.
Yeah, you don't want to build there,
Because
otherwise you lost your
paycheck
investment.
is when it gets really windy. Okay, so the question is, just looking at everything here, and thinking of your journey in our field, in this building, starting in this building, and then in Madison, you've really been exemplary in terms of taking a path that few of us had. I stayed in academia for 55 years, et cetera. But what advice do you have for people connecting up to the climate issue, or also applied meteorology, because that's what you did. You were a trailblazer here in Madison on that. What about the advice for the younger folks here?
I think there'll be more and more applications, and you and I talked about this earlier, about because the lid is going to come off this, because of, there are now clear economic benefits that go the directions I talked about. There's a better political will. The people are now majority in favor of it. This is all going to blow open, hopefully, very soon. And there are going to be lots and lots and lots of interesting jobs in wind energy and wind modeling and solar siting and, you name it, all kinds of geoengineering studies to individual power utilities who frequently tell me they're sticking their finger in the wind when they try to figure out, they know what the Public Service Commission wants, but they have no idea necessarily what the meteorology means for where they should site stuff or what they should do. So those are just a few examples. I think it's going to be a very exciting time to be in atmospheric sciences, because I think there will be a lot more diversity to the jobs that are available. And I think many of you can make your own positions too. If you see one of these areas that interests you, go knock on some doors. Say, hey, what if I helped you with this? Or couldn't we do that? You might get some turn downs, but you might get some people say, wow, just who I was looking for, Can you really do that? And the main thing comes back to what I said in the beginning. There's all these opportunities crossing us like photons. Reach out and grab them. Don't be afraid to do that. Some of them you're going to want to say, oh, I don't like that. Go away. Some of them are going to take you in entirely different directions in your life. And if I have any, I don't think I've accomplished anything really outstanding in my life, but I think the thing that I can say is I've had a very interesting life. And I've done lots and lots of different things, and I'm still doing a lot of different things today. I run a venture capital company for new startup companies in Wisconsin. Keeps me young because there's always people coming many a week saying, I've got this invention and I can save the world. And, some of them will. And so it really is cool.
Terry, you have a unique perspective on the interface of our science and the communication of it, and perspectives on the future, on both problems of weather and climate. I wonder if you have an opinion on how close are we to the wave break that you've hinted at a couple of times, where business interests realize, regardless of political opinions that some of their own allies might hold, it doesn't make any sense to withstand some of the innovation that you're talking about, because it's actually profitable.
Part of that wave is already broken. You take power utilities. I couldn't find a power utility in the United States that wants to fund another new coal plant, or that isn't in the process of planning to take all their coal offline, for example, Trump or no Trump. Yeah. That's one of many, many examples. But the economics are there. And you saw that thing from the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, that's right.
Top business people in the world say, these are the three biggest problems in the world. They all have to do with our field.
Yeah, so there's real hope in that too, it seems to me.
And I think that you hit on something there when you said communications, because I think you might consider adding a communications course, particularly for climate change impacts and how to help individuals understand all these major transitions that are going to happen, how to make them excited about it, that kind of thing. I think it could be a very interesting course on that. Yeah.
Yes, I'll ask a quick question here. My name is Caleb. I work here. Question that I have related to power transition and working here at the Southern Country. As a young scientist coming up with almost suicidal or kind of like career breaking when we were taught to be publishing papers and focusing on grants to looking outside of that to start a company like yours. Some of it, for example, some of those persons running now, but for the series with risk involved and the process it takes in terms of what you need to a career is really scary, and I'm wondering how you do that.
Can you repeat any of that?
Go through the process of start going from working here to starting.
I can come close and say to you.
How do you go from an academic career to an entrepreneurial career?
Watch those things coming across, grab onto one. Bob Wallersheim and Sumi said, hey, we got to do this work we got this grant to do innovative video applications in meteorology. I know it's not necessarily what you intended to do. Okay, I'll do it. I told somebody I talked to today that I couldn't get a job for 2 years when I graduated because all the people were coming back from Vietnam. They all had veterans preferences. I applied for the National Weather Service, about the only place I could go, I thought. I was out visiting my parents in Santa Barbara, and he said, well, I know this guy Bob Elliott. He owns North American Weather Consultants out at the airport. Why don't you go see him? Oh, yeah. So I went out there, and Bob was very kind. And he said, you see this stack here? Those are all resumes. And he seemed like a nice young kid, but it was like eons more experience in those resumes than yours. So finally, I screwed up my courage, and I said, Bob, I've been looking for a job for 2 years in my field. I really want to work in meteorology. Surely there's something that none of your team wants to do. Whether it's mopping the kitchen or whatever it is, it's not a popular thing. I'll do that, and I'll do it for nothing. Just give me a chance. And his eyes went far away. Well, there is this one job. And he said, we have this cloud seeding contract up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They drag a mobile home up in the wilderness for you there, and 65 miles to get your groceries or go to the bank. None of our guys want to go up there. They got families, they got this, they got that. You got to be there all winter. And he said, I wouldn't feel right about not paying you anything, but we could pay you a little bit. So the biggest thing when you have interest is don't let them go by. You may decide as you go down the pathways, not something you want to do. So what? Do something else. I mean, we look at all the ways I screwed up and trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do and how I would do it. If I hadn't done all that stuff, I was everything from a cab driver to a butcher to a night oil company dispatch guy. I learned from every bit of it, something.
Maybe one or some more questions?
The idea of reducing the albedo of the Earth, or increasing the albedo of the Earth, I'm supposed to say, doesn't really prevent CO2 from rising, so you have acid oceans becoming more acid, so that's kind of not a really good long-term solution, even if you want to do $1 trillion a year seeding.
I hadn't heard that mentioned in that argument, so I'll have to look that up. I'm sure you're right. And I'm certainly aware of the ocean acidification, which is going to be killing a lot of our coral that isn't already dead. And will interfere with other. Have you read The Sixth Extinction? Anybody hasn't read The Sixth Extinction should read it. One of the chapters on ocean acidification. Thank you all. I'm sorry to have kept you over time.